Apreciados amigos y amigas, qué alegría que estemos todos juntos aquí en la Iglesia de Todos los Santos. Dear friends, welcome. It is a joy that we can all be here together on this fourth Sunday of Advent at All Saints Church. Wherever we are together this morning. We have, ever since this pandemic started, back in 1974, we have had a partner in love. And our partner in love this week is the Immigrant Resource Center of San Gabriel Valley. And I'm just realizing I did not send that information to our wonderful Dan McCarroll, who's our usher and greeter this morning, to put on Facebook. So Dan, and by the way, it's Dan's birthday today. I'll get you that information. The IRC is an amazing organization. It provides quality, low-cost immigration legal services and referral services, helping members of our community navigate immigration law and protect and provide for themselves and their families. You can donate to the IRC by just going to ircsgv.org. That's ircsgv.org. We'll keep telling you that because I don't think I got that to anyone in time to put it on the website or anywhere. So that's on me, and we'll hope that you help support the Immigrant Resource Center of San Gabriel Valley, our partner in love this morning. So now on to this morning's forum. We are in our 10th month of this pandemic, and we are all wearing thin. I think we are all kind of maybe beyond wearing thin. And the holidays are especially hard because we want so much to be with each other and we can't. And to top it all off, we're being told that we haven't even seen the worst of this yet, which is disheartening to say the least. It's more than just how do we have safe behavior so we try not to catch this? How do we care for ourselves if we have caught this? The mental, emotional, and spiritual impact of this pandemic is affecting us all. And so the question that we're wrestling with is, how do we make it through? How do we build resilience through the long haul of COVID-19? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. And we are blessed to have three members of our All Saints Church pastoral care team combine their professional expertise with their spiritual wisdom in these challenging times. First, Sally Howard. You know Sally as one of our associate rectors here at All Saints Church. She is also a clinical psychologist with a second doctorate focused on human development, healthy systems, and recovery from trauma. Staci Kennelly is a spiritual director and the spiritual direction coordinator at All Saints Church. She enjoys photography, adventure, and spending time with her family. Thomas Diaz, he, him, and I forgot to say my name is Mike Kinman. I'm the rector here. My pronouns are he, him. Thomas holds a master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of the West with a focus on third wave and mindfulness-based therapies. As a member of All Saints Church since 2018, Thomas is on the vestry and co-leads the LGBTQ plus ministry. He's also the chair of the community care team at All Saints Church. Now, I'm sure you're going to have questions, and we are going to use the prayer text line to collect them. So you can text your questions to 910-TEXT-ASC. That's 910-TEXT-ASC. Or if you're into the digits, it's 910-839-8272. 910-839-8272. I'll keep repeating that number throughout the morning. For now, I'm going to turn it over to Sally Howard. Sally?
All right. Thank you, Mike. It's great to be with all of you this morning. And Thomas, you can go ahead and start the screen share, if you would, please. Thomas is also a technical guru, I add, among his many talents. When we talk about the longevity of this time in the pandemic, we really are interested in how do we build resiliency. And resiliency is, in fact, a whole body experience. It is, mind, body, spirit, heart. And when we think about mind, part of what is helpful really is to have basic information about what trauma is. And so I want to start with that. And the word trauma itself comes from the Greek word for wounded. And originally it meant, physical wounding only, but over time it's come to include both physical and emotional events. So what is trauma? There's lots of different definitions, but trauma is an event or series of events or circumstances that are experienced as physically or emotionally threatening to the well-being of a person or someone close to that person. Trauma tends to have or can have lasting adverse effects on a person's physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. We are creatures, we are meaning makers, and sometimes when traumatic things happen, it challenges our stories about God and God's efficacy and being with us, eminence also. And so, whoops, can you go back to the other one? Oh, thank you, Thomas. Other way? Yeah, you got it. Thank you. So traumatic events can overwhelm a person's coping strategies, causing extreme distress. Okay, next. Now you can go to the next one. Thanks. Also, trauma doesn't necessarily have to be experienced. An event doesn't have to be experienced personally. We do experience vicarious trauma, not only of, people that we know and love, but also, watching another human being suffer. We don't have to do it or have it happen to us personally in order to have trauma. And also, trauma that has a dehumanizing component or cruelty component to it is the most impactful of all kinds of trauma, again, because it affects us in our spirits as well as potentially our bodies. So trauma can stem from, lots of different events, physical and emotional abuse, either as an adult or a child, accidents, natural disasters like the pandemic, grief and loss, witnessing, again, acts of violence, and medical intervention sometimes. And also, cultural and intergenerational and historical trauma do affect us. There is evidence now, we know that there are actually genetic markers that get passed on intergenerationally between parents and children, parents who've experienced severe trauma. And also when we talk about cultural and historical trauma, that also includes things like racialized trauma. And if we put another leaf on this tree right now, I guess it would be COVID-19. Okay, Thomas, next one. And, there are levels of trauma. There is individual trauma, something that happens to us as a person, or interpersonal trauma, between people. A whole community can experience trauma. And also systems, again, in institutions. So things like policing, mass incarceration, bias and prejudice against LGBTQ plus people. Those all are sources of trauma. And it, makes sense with our mission at All Saints, because we care about each other individually, our relationships, our community, and we are working together on the sources of systems and institutional trauma. Okay, next slide. And I want to talk a little bit about these things, window of tolerance and hyperarousal, and hypoarousal. And also to let you know that Brunelle Anderson, who is one of our parishioners and a clinical psychologist, is going to come back in January. And she has expertise also in trauma and talking about things. So this is a little bit of an advertisement too for her. And she will go into much more detail about some of these things than I am today. But our window of tolerance is kind of the place where we feel, pretty much at ease, calm, not feeling overwhelmed, feeling, aware. It's interesting, when we're in kind of our comfort zone of this kind anyway, where we're not too, over aroused or under, not enough, stimulation in our lives. This is the place that people feel safe and secure. And our awareness of ourselves and other people actually grows in this window of comfort. But with, trauma, things that, really overwhelm our ability to cope, we can go into hyperarousal, which includes, things like high anxiety, racing thoughts, sometimes being emotionally overwhelmed. And sometimes it's things like being, reactive or more irritable. And it feels in some ways like the reaction maybe isn't our norm. But, we can also, with trauma, go into hypoarousal. That is to disconnect or shut down. Often we experience this as low energy, feeling depressed. And sometimes in its most severe forms, it can actually make us numb. And people often feel some sense of shame. We know that with trauma, even if it's like an unavoidable accident, something we had nothing to do with, that we can feel guilty, as if we, were responsible for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And, one of the things that's most important about trauma is to remember that it is something bad, painful that happens to us. It's not about us, but it happens to us. And Thomas, yeah, and these are just some of the ways that we can experience trauma. We can, I don't know if I have been not in a injurious accident, but if hit from, the side and flinching when I drove for a while because of, the expectation, the trauma response. It can be things like chronic pain or headaches or, substance abuse and loss of interest, irritability, those kinds of things. And it's helpful to be aware that these are some of the some of the ways that trauma can impact us, because, we can experience it sometimes and not have any idea, what it is or what it's caused by. And it's really helpful, to have that information. Also decreased concentration. I think almost everybody, I know we talk about it sometimes, in our staff, that it takes longer to do things than it did before, or insomnia. A lot of people are struggling with insomnia. So those are some of the ways that trauma can be expressed in our bodies and our emotions. Okay. And lastly, and this will lead into Thomas, this is an interesting graph of these experiences of depression, anxiety, mental health, stress disorders, burnout, and compassion fatigue and grief over the course of COVID-19. And this is, I think, largely, I think this data is from the United States, but you can see with the first wave that these things from a baseline before began to rise. And with the second wave, we're seeing even higher degrees of depression and anxiety and grief. We've all lost things in this pandemic, whether it's our usual way of doing things or contact with others. And so there is an increase in these kinds of experiences, and therefore, ever more the need for resiliency and things that can help ground us again emotionally and spiritually. And Thomas, I'm going to hand off to you.
I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Thank you, Sally, for that part of the presentation. So, it's not a surprise for any of us as we enter 10 months of this pandemic that we all know we are sharing a commonality of burnout and fatigue that we saw in that chart. But most importantly, what we all are starting to feel is that we're not alone in the way that we feel. And the most important thing that when we say that these are common experiences is to simply say, it's normal to feel how you're feeling, whether it's, if you're feeling fatigue or just in despair, or even if you're now entering a phase of feeling hopeful because of the rollout of the vaccines. The most important thing is that all of the common experiences that we're feeling is a normal response. So, there are different impacts to trauma, and there are obviously different impacts when we face a life adjustment. And that's not to say lightly, but we've all in some ways, and in ways I think that as a human race we've never experienced before, that we all went into this adjustment together. And it came rapidly, abruptly. We didn't ask for this. One night we all went to bed thinking we knew what life was, and then we woke up. And abruptly, we had to adjust. And not that we just adjusted one day. This adjustment has taken us on a 10-month almost journey of constantly having to readjust to what we thought would be just a baseline of not having to move anymore. And as we know as well, unfortunately, it looks like there's even more ahead. So the reason why we talk about this now is that there is a power when we really start to cultivate a sense of resiliency into it. And one of the best ways we do that is by first acknowledging that this is a common thing we're all going through, that you're not alone in it, and that how you're feeling is how you're feeling. It's normal, and that no one should have to define it for you. And the most important thing is you should not have to seek approval for it. This is something that you are experiencing, and what we can do for one another, especially for this need of community, beloved community, is actually validate and support each other in the way that we're all experiencing this common reality of COVID-19. COVID-19 has shown us in some big and small ways that not only do realities of our lives have turned so rapidly, but it also has brought this sense of uncertainty. And this umbrella of uncertainty has grown over the past 10 months. Some have more of a weight into uncertainty than others. And that could be also very stressful as well. And that could really cause what we see in that previous chart, that the incline for fatigue and of grief and despair. But there's also something unique about that when we talk about this uncertainty, because this is now becoming a common uncertainty. And what we're starting to see too as well are folks who are worried for other folks who are most likely not going to be able to keep their business, their small business, or find that employment in the beginning of the year. This has become a very universal experience of just uncertainty for maybe ourselves or even now for our neighbor. So there is a hopeful tool for that, and that And part of that resiliency is saying that, well, if I'm definitely, feeling uncertain in this moment, I definitely know that my neighbor is also feeling the same way. And that creates that commonality, but also that solidarity you can have with each other. And what you're doing is you're building resiliency. And that's the beauty of that tool. So point being, it's okay to not feel okay. It's okay to feel encouraged, or it's even okay to continue to feel discouraged. And it's also okay to be in the middle. Of those two, kind of points. And it's okay to feel if you know that you're getting to a point where maybe you can't do this just solely by yourself or with the folks you live with or the friends you have, that seeking that professional help is also very important and part of the process. So, I also encourage you that you also investigate with that within yourself. So as we're talking about resiliency, there are, I'm using my background here in counseling psychology, there are almost thousands of ways now we can really tap into the great power and spirit of resiliency. And that's the beauty, I think, that of what COVID-19 and what really any natural disaster brings into a human experience is that, we have these things that are already built. The problem is that now we have to get this out to the people and not just keep it within folks who have been trained in it. So one of the goals that we've had hope for this forum is to be able to provide you with a few of these resilient tools so that you can take them, especially as we go now into this, Christmas week, as we approach Christmas Eve and day. Boy, are we all going to be feeling a sense of, Christmas, blues Christmas this year. In so many ways. So one of the resilient tools that I would like to present with you today is a mindfulness practice called RAIN. It's an acronym, and actually I'm going to pull up my thing here so I can show you to the rest of you. Oh no, where's the... right here. Okay. So I'll get my notes here. Okay. So RAIN, which is an acronym for RAIN, it was developed by a clinical psychologist and well-known mindfulness teacher, Tara Brach. And you can learn more at tarabrach.com/RAIN. And there's just so many unique ways to do this. But one of the ways that I'm going to show you is how to bring this into a mindfulness practice. So let me go into a little bit about what RAIN is, and some of you may have heard of it. So each letter, is meant to gear you into a form of investigation of what's happening in the moment. And this is, usually typically mindfulness practices are meant, for a formal meditation setting, but, this is also really great if you are starting to feel, antsy or trigger, just walking to your car, getting the mail, or just even, being in your kitchen, that you can actually pause and actually do this practice where you can do what is you're recognizing, you're allowing the experience, you are investigating what's happening, and then the most important part is you're nurturing a form of self-compassion, which I'll get into in just a little bit. So let me go into a little bit for each letter so we have a little better understanding exactly what we're doing. So with R for recognizing, this is the most kind of important part in the resilient work, because what you're doing is you're going to put a halt immediately to the thoughts that are wanting to run rapid into the other direction. We all know what that feeling is. It can just come from one little trigger, one little thought, and within an hour, we're in this virtual space of just constant thinking, thoughts we did not think we had built within us, and now we're just rolling with those emotions and feelings. So when you're in that moment, The R is just to basically stop and, stop and recognize that you actually are having a moment of anxiety, of fear, being overwhelmed, being tired. It could be that you just listened to something on NPR and then, the mind just went, with it just heard. And that's just such a normal thing that we all do. But in those moments, that's when we can actually just pause and stop and recognize what's happening in this moment for me, what given thoughts and feelings and even behaviors, recognizing what am I doing right now? Am I going to immediately go and do I grab something and like start cleaning because I'm trying to numb myself away from the thoughts, which is fine, but we're acknowledging what the behaviors we're doing. Maybe it's grabbing that phone and saying, I got to find out more. And you find one feed after another feed after another feed. And I'm totally guilty of doing that myself in these past 10 months. Being so locked into every news amp that there is on a Apple phone. But then we start to see how that is affecting us, acknowledging that, what I'm doing right now, is that really gearing me myself for an alignment of feeling alive, or even in a positive based note, am I able to even regulate what's happening right now? So when you stop and recognize, it's like waking up from a dream. And what Tara Brach says so wonderfully about this recognize is it's almost like you're coming out of a trance. And that, I think, is key, especially when we are so focused on news at the moment, which is very important to do and make sure that we're being updated. But it can, how easily we can get into a trance, right, of it's all that is happening in our world. So when we simply recognize, we can actually then allow it to be in that moment. And then we move on to an allowance, saying that this is it. This is what I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling this way. And it's actually allowing the experience to happen really indicates that I'm not going to fix it. I'm not going to try to even avoid it, which is how tough that can be sometimes, especially when you're hearing more, more cases going up. You're like, I want to avoid what I'm hearing. But instead, in this moment, you say, I can't fix it. I can't change it, nor am I going to avoid it. I'm just going to stay in this moment. And that can actually be liberating, to know that you don't even have to change what's happening, that and you don't have to continue to listen or hear what's happening. You can just turn off all that is around you in your environment and just be with yourself and saying, this is just what I heard. And now I can just be in this moment. I'm recognizing what's happening, and now I'm allowing to what has to be in this moment. And I would say that both doing, recognizing, allowing, that takes time to even cultivate for this to become a simple practice. But the hope and really the beauty in this is that the more that this becomes a repetitive thing, it becomes second nature. And you realize what you're actually doing. It's like, oh, I'm doing great. I'm coming into a space to recognize and to allow, which then it goes into, once you kind of have these two, pieces that go into it for rain, it's then you can go into a form of investigation. And this is probably going to be something that we all actually are already doing as people of faith or people of spirituality, because investigating is really you're almost inviting what Tara Brach and so many others have called a mental whisper. And we can voice that can be spirit, that can be God, that can be whoever who needs to be, but that mental whisper who comes into you and simply says, I'm here. I get it. This is hard. I don't want to face this. I don't want to hear this right now. And then that, by allowing that, that mental whisper to be present, it gives you permission now to kind of go more inward and ask yourself, what is it that this moment is asking of me? Is it asking me that this is just what it is? I'm human and I'm scared. Is it asking me to maybe pray a little bit more for someone else that I know is going to be affected by the news I just heard? Or is it that I need to do something for myself that will bring some type of soothing presence or soothing feelings for me to feel okay again? And it also brings in what we just mentioned earlier. And is it okay just not to feel okay? And the important thing is that we don't fix it. We can't change it. But what you're doing is you're actually opening yourself just to be more kind to yourself, especially when it comes to heavy, heavy news or just human experiences like trauma that you might be experiencing. So investigation, can take a minute, or it can take maybe a good portion of your day. And you can just tell yourself, I'm in investigation right now. I'm investigating, and then when those thoughts and those feelings start bouncing back, you can actually then push them back by saying, no, I'm going to investigate them. I'm just going to let them investigate them. I'm going to recognize it. I'm going to allow it. And I'm just going to recognize and investigate for what they have to be for me right now. Which then leads you to the last part of RAIN, which is, I think, the most important part, and that is the nurturing of self-compassion. Kristen Neff, Dr. Kristen Neff is the guru to self-compassion, and you can go to selfcompassion.org for more information. Dr. Neff is the associate professor for educational psychology, University of Texas at Austin. Wonderful stuff that she has developed in her research. But one of the things that I love about her definition of self-compassion is simply, it just rounds up like this: who said that being human was about being perfect? That's what self-compassion is. It's the idea that we are not perfect. And who said we had to be perfect? We have so many different ways, I think, in our Western ways of conceiving of ourselves, that, being perfect, and obviously avoids me having to go through any turmoil of life. And we're given that messages all the time, and they're unavailable at this point. We can't avoid them. But I think when we draw into, or at least tap into, what Kristen Neff calls the fountain of self-compassion, which just flows out. And for us as people of faith, we can call that grace. That we recognize that, we're such a fragile species that is bound to go through these experiences. And that when we can finally acknowledge as an individual that, I'm not perfect. This world will always struggle in some ways and form. But the best thing that I can do is actually love the person and the life that I'm in, with all its troubles and all its mishaps, because I know who I am or who I'm becoming. And maybe that's the most important thing for some of us, is just acknowledging, I know who I am becoming. And you have that sense and that goal that's dwelling within you. So self-compassion then just takes you back into this beautiful cycle of just recognizing, allowing, investigating, and saying, I'm not perfect, but this flow is allowing me to go and through and for that experience. Once you get a handle of that, I tell you, my friends, you'll be able to really handle some of these very, unfortunate, traumas and experiences that I think are coming directly from COVID-19, and probably will be directed by so many other experiences we've had in the past few years. But this is the beauty of resiliency, is when we actually built in these programs really for us to combat them. And I'll leave you on this for RAIN, is that you have to find some form of safety within yourself to want to do this. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to what we just said. It's okay to not feel okay. It's okay to still continue to feel discouraged even after doing this practice. That is fine. Just practice it at your own pace. Take it for what it needs to be. Don't put any more emphasis and again, this is not making you perfect. Becoming resilient or having resiliency does not make you a better, perfect human being. It actually, what it does, it validates you even more that you are human and that you are in need for tenderness and for compassion. And that truly is the beauty of rain. And so, that is something that we hope to provide to you as the community of All Saints. And and I have to say that there are so many ways that you can do rain. On YouTube, there are great meditation teachers who have taken their own twist to rain. So go look it out, go discover it. And I think you'll find some really neat, unique things about that it's out there with that. So that is rain. And what's really unique about this is that there is a spiritual concept to anything that is resiliency. And so that's why we are so happy to have Staci Kennelly here who's the coordinator of spiritual direction at All Saints, to give us now a spiritual resiliency tools that we can have during this time. So Staci.
And I'm actually going to jump in really quick before Staci and say, if you have questions, I'd love for you to text them. We're starting to get some text questions in. That number is 910-TEXT-ASC, 910-TEXT-ASC. That's also 910-839-8272, 910-839-8272. Okay, Staci, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Thomas. It's so good. Yeah, life can be challenging. It can, and especially this year, the year of COVID. And it can be helpful to have a trusted person in your life that listens to you with compassion and an ear for discerning the movement of the divine in your life. And so it's so good to use the tools that Thomas was talking about here. And sometimes it helps to have someone walk you through these practices and help you process the emotions and the feelings and how they relate to you and your relationship with God. So for example, the I in rain that Thomas was talking about, that stands for investigate. And it can be helpful to have a journey partner investigate with you and have eyes with empathy and grace. I know in my own life, sometimes it's harder to have empathy and grace for ourselves. And so it's nice to have someone that kind of goes through life with you and reminds you of that empathy and grace. And that's what a spiritual director does. And so I thought I would give you an example of an exercise a spiritual director might do with you. And so I invite you to do it with me. It's only 6 minutes. So I invite you to close your eyes. Breathe patiently, evenly, in and out through your nose. Breathe in deeply, feeling your lungs fill up with air. And now release with a full breath out. Again, with a full, slow breath in. And a full, slow breath out. And now, let your breathing relax. Finding that balance between letting go of a controlled breath while still being aware of your breath. Take note. How are you feeling right now in your body, heart, and mind? Ask yourself, what is my body telling me? Maybe you notice a physical sensation of discomfort or ease. Thank your body for carrying you, for reminding you to slow down, for helping you to notice. And then, from an overall sense of the body, check in with your heart. Are there any emotions present? Welcome your feelings without judgment. With unpleasant emotions, the habit of the mind is to try to rid of these experiences. Instead, allow them to be present in you. You may try offering a simple phrase of stability and acceptance. You may want to say, right now I feel like this. Or, this feeling won't be with me forever. And now, what is going on in your mind? Are there any stories present, positive or negative, that you are replaying in your mind? Be curious about these repeated stories. Are there connections maybe between them and how your body and heart are feeling? Take a cleansing breath here. Breathe in. Breathe out. Come back to your whole self. Come back to all of you, your body, your heart, and your mind. Now ask yourself, what is standing out? Notice what stands out without self-criticism, without judgment. Just notice. Notice with an open heart, a loving kindness, a sense of compassion towards yourself. To help us tap into that sense of compassion, we'll repeat to ourselves a few phrases. These feelings are not mine to carry alone. Many others feel the same way I do. I accept these feelings, thoughts, and emotions as a shared human experience. These feelings and thoughts don't make me bad or good. They make me human. They make me alive. take this last moment together to be kind to yourself. Extend to yourself compassion and charity. As you sit in your gentleness and love, I invite you to pray with me. As my soul grows quiet, I return to that astounding truth that at the heart of my being, I am eternally loved. I rest in your embrace. Amen. We can come back to each other. So that is just an example of maybe something a spiritual director might do with you, and then spend some time maybe unpacking some of the things that you noticed. I think it's important to add the body aspect. I think the body reminds us of what we're feeling a lot. I think sometimes you can have a stomach ache when you're nervous about something. You can have a headache, when you've been stressing out for something too long. And you can even feel tired when your body's saying take a nap. So.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. We're getting some, wow, I don't really even want to talk after that. Just thank you. That was helpful. We're getting some questions in. There's still time for all of your questions. That number is 910-TEXT-ASC, 910-TEXT-ASC. It's also 910-839-8272, 910-839-8272. First question we have says, for the chart that had hypo and hyper arousal, can you be in both states at the same time? Sally, maybe you can take that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, I think so. And certainly, can go back and forth between those states. One of the ways our bodies try to take care of ourselves is in that hyper aroused state, like, fight or flight. Sometimes it is, to our advantage in a sense, just to kind of shut it down. So people can definitely go back and forth, or, sometimes I imagine it can be experientially like you're in the same place, at both times. Yeah. And our bodies get tired with chronic stress. Our bodies get tired. Yeah.
So I guess I've got something, and we're waiting for more questions to come in. So please put them in. Just sort of specifically about disconnection and grief. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've experienced as a community is that people who have been really dear to us have died during this time, and we're separated from each other. We're separated from them. I know, whenever I get a notification that one more person has COVID, there's a fear, and I also recognize that a piece of that is anticipatory grief, even though I don't really know what's going to happen. Can you talk about grief? Can you talk about strategies of dealing with grief, both individually and for us as a community? Anyone?
Either one of you want to jump in? Yeah.
Well, Mike, I think that one of the most important, things that often come from, a mindfulness practice like we just been practicing together is that how much we bottle up grief, that is really within us. And so, one of the things that are important when we are trying to still cultivate a sense of being open enough to know that we're in this experience is to really, it goes back to, to the art to recognize that these are things that are just going to come when they flow in and when they flow out. And that's what that grief is. And that really at times we want to be able to control it as much as we can, because again, that, anticipatory of like what's going to happen. But then what we know, but then that's when that buildup of fatigue, or even just building it up, saying, well, no, I won't go there yet. I'll wait till I hear something else. And then that other news comes, and then it bounces back to another portion of that. And it just keeps bouncing and bouncing to each other. And really what you're doing is you're just creating what we call it in the field, like these traps that are starting just to kind of grapple you so that you can't get a hold or sense of grief. And grief in particular itself is, well, there's several, emotions and feelings that are attached. And what's, what can be very tricky about grief is that it's, dressed up to be only one-sided, and that, that must be the common experience that we're all feeling. And in reality is that it's really, this kind of two-sided thing where there is that common experience that we're all feeling as a community. But then on the other side, it's like, well, then it's the way that you've always dealt with grief. And there's, there's social cultural, aspects that go into it as well. It's like, how was grief taught to you? Sometimes some people were fortunate that grief was taught to them, like, this is what it means to feel sad. This is what it means when you lose something. Or for some, a good majority of folks that we're finding out through trauma research is that they had to learn this on their own, in the form of being detached, in the forms of abandonment. So it really does depend on how you experienced it from really a child, adolescent, all the way up to, your current age that you are. And so why grief becomes so tricky is that then the way that we interact with each other with it is we there's this pre-assumption like, oh, you must be feeling how I'm feeling, without even checking in and saying, hey, how is that affecting you? And to be completely blown away, like, oh gosh, you're not doing it. You're not experiencing the way I'm feeling it. So let me hear you out. Or, and then if you don't have that access to, a confidant or someone that you can be listening to, then something like RAIN can then help you then say, no, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm supposed to feel this way. And that's grief. I'm supposed to feel this way.
I think, I would add to that again that, grief really is a process, and it takes a lot of work. It takes energy that is ongoing, that we're not always conscious of. And I think it's important to be aware that it does come and go. One of the things I love about, Jewish practice is, both a year of mourning, Shiva, but then a year that, and a monthly recognition with a rabbi, of that person's passing. And so it's kind of built in culturally, the expectation that this is something that takes time, to do. And I think, within our own community, we do have some services that, allow for that. Blue Christmas, we're going to have a Blue Christmas service on Monday, in which we bring, our losses together and hold them in, that community experience together. And I think for me, the Eucharist, and some of the ways you talk about it, Mike, but, of bringing our full selves every week, to the table, and laying those things there with the sense that we have a God who grieves with us, who holds our tears, every tear, in God's flask, close to her breast. And I think those things are also helpful. And can I, Staci, do you have something to add? I want to talk about it. A physical thing also. Well, go ahead. Do you have something about the grief part before it's kind of changing?
No.
I was just thinking that, sometimes also our state can be, we can get so overwrought, right? That it's really hard to calm at all, to get into a space to reflect. And, there are actually some simple physical techniques that are helpful sometimes. They come from a practice called havening. But they're things like if you put your hands on your arms, the back of your arms, and rub your arms. There's something physiologically that is very soothing and helpful, and can help you have, get to self-compassion, but also rubbing gently around your eyes and sometimes, around your eyes, that in kind of a circle. And, sometimes rubbing your hands together in a circle. And it actually interrupts or can help interrupt that, anatomical nervous system that's going, through the roof. It can interrupt that.
I have time for a couple more questions, but if you have them, keep bringing them in. Let me see if I can find it. I had it just a second ago. And so, sorry. Here it is. This one, it says, I'm actually feeling pretty good. And then I wonder, is there something wrong with me? Everyone else seems to be struggling so much. And then I start feeling bad about feeling good. Any thoughts?
Great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it's okay to feel how you feel. It's okay to feel encouraged or discouraged. And that's what can be something, as part of this kind of global experience, is that, again, we all are going in this, we've all faced the rapid change, but then we all have had our own personal experience that for some, maybe there wasn't much change compared to like our neighbor. And then there is that guilt and that almost like self-shame, that feeling good about myself, feeling good about, my own world, makes me a bad person. And in reality, no, it doesn't. It just actually what it does, it just highlights where you are at, in the spectrum of your feelings and thoughts. And what's also important, that even if you're in that state of saying like, I feel good and things are well, if you to even do a mindfulness practice like RAIN, it actually opens you up even more into possibly how you can then even be of a support and have to have solidarity for those who are not there yet. And you can still even go into an investigation as to why you still are feeling good. Just because you have not been at all, been disturbed by it, doesn't mean that, investigating that doesn't need to happen. It's still even more importantly, if you're in a positive space, to still investigate, to allow and recognize where that's coming from. And then all it does is highlights, a form of your own resiliency, and then how you can actually be of support for someone else.
Yeah, and it's curious and interesting to me that the person said they were feeling good and then had this added, shame aspect to it.
Yeah.
So I think I'd want to maybe be curious about that. Why would you feel shame or embarrassment, or that you're wrong somehow? I think that's an interesting part of feelings. And I think that's where RAIN does come in, is, why would you feel guilt about feeling good?
That's right.
Yeah. So, one more really quickly, talking about being in the hyper state. If you find yourself in a hyper state, how do you reach out for help when you can't express it? Also, what can we do to help those close to us if we suspect that they are suffering from this trauma? And you have 1 minute. So.
Anyone?
I think that's a good one for you, Sally.
Read the first one again, Mike. The first one is.
If you find yourself in a hyper state, how do you reach out for help when you can't express it?
Yeah. Well, I would say, sometimes sometimes journaling, but you don't have to know ahead of time what it is, to talk. I mean, we often feel like a pressure, like it's got to be understood or formed or put into words. And it isn't always like that, right? I think it's still okay to reach out and say,
Yep.
or I'm just, overwhelmed, or I don't even know what's wrong, and I think that can be, that can be helpful in just reaching out. And I think it's helpful to reach out to each other too, right? To, you notice something, or it's not as easy because we're not together, but, checking in on people, finding out. I remember, after losing a family member, one of my professors was walking across campus one day, 4 months later, and said something like, "So Sally, how is your grieving going?" Which totally shocked me,
Right.
But because I thought it was done already. But anyway, but I think reaching out to each other just to check in, how are you doing? And if the answer is, what, I feel great, or I'm feeling okay, I'm feeling good, that's great. But reaching out, I think that's what we do.
Well, this has been wonderful. And actually, on that note, just really encourage everyone, reach out to each other, because I know sometimes when I'm in the most need of help, it's when I'm least likely to reach out and ask for it. Because sometimes I just want to curl up in a ball anyway, and I don't have the energy for it. Even in a small congregation, people can kind of slip away. It's especially challenging in a large congregation. We have amazing pastoral care resources that you all are part of. And even then, we are all the church, and we need everyone. And so whenever you find yourself saying the church should, remember you're the church. And if there's someone it's like, oh my gosh, if they come up in your prayer time, or you're just thinking, and it's like, I haven't heard from them or seen them in a while, reach out and just check in. And if people are hurting, they may not be able to talk about it. And it is always a wonderful thing to call someone up and just say, I was thinking about you, and I care about you, and I miss you, because it's that message that you're a beautiful child of God, and you're loved, that is healing for all of us. So Staci, Sally, Thomas, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be doing this again. And grateful. Go ahead.
Can I mention, actually, the community care team, once a month, we are doing a prayer exercise. It's an hour and a half. It's free.
Excellent.
And the next one is January 16th at 4:00. So please check the website. It's for everyone, and there's no max. So since we're all on Zoom.
That's right. And the same is true for our Blue Christmas service, which is at 6 p.m. Tomorrow. So please tune in on Zoom for that. Thomas, anything you want to add, Sally, before we kick over to Kelly Aaron?
Just to remind that the community care team, we do have, side-by-side companions, especially during this coming week. If you feel you are just in need of someone to just be a listening ear and to be able to speak to, we ask you just to, call 626-298-9551, and we'll get you with a companion.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now we're going to kick it over to either the Meditative Chapel, or if you stay right here, you can go to Children's Chapel with Kelly Aaron O'Phelan. And so thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being with us.
You bet.